you too can learn how to interpret dreams. In the 4th chapter of Daniel, King Nebuchadnezzar had a second dream that he was unable to understand. This one he could remember, and he sought to all the wise men of the kingdom to help him understand its meaning, and they were unable. There's a reason why they weren't able, and you will be able when you learn this secret. The dream was this. In chapter 4 of Daniel, beginning in verse 10, the king says, "Thus were the visions of mine head in my bed. I saw, and behold, a tree in the midst of the earth, and the height thereof was great. And the tree grew and was strong, and the height thereof reached unto heaven, and the sight thereof to the end of the earth. The leaves thereof were fair, and the fruit thereof much, and it was meat for all. The beasts of the field had shadow under it, and the fowls of the heaven dwelt in the boughs thereof, and all flesh was fed of it. I saw in the visions of my head upon my bed, and behold, a watcher and an holy one came down from heaven. He cried aloud and said thus, Hew down the tree, and cut off his branches, shake off his leaves, and scatter his fruit. Let the beasts get away from under it, and the fowls from his branches. Nevertheless, leave the stump of his roots in the earth, even with a band of iron and brass, in the tender grass of the field, and let it be wet with the dew of heaven, and let his portion be with the beasts in the grass of the earth. Let his heart be changed from man's, and let a beast's heart be given unto him, and let 7 times pass over him." So there's the dream. How is it that we'll be able to interpret it when the wise men of Babylon weren't able? The secret is found in Jeremiah chapter 8 and verse 9. And here's the secret. The wise men are ashamed. They are dismayed and taken. That's the case it was, no? Lo, they have rejected the word of the Lord, and what wisdom is in them? The wise men had not accepted the interpretation that Daniel gave for the dream in chapter 2 about the great image. And by not accepting previous revelation from heaven, they were unable to interpret this dream. But we are with Daniel accepting the interpretation that he gave to the dream of the great image, that Nebuchadnezzar was that head of gold and not the entire image, that his kingdom would be followed by a second and a third and a fourth, and then a big bang would come when it was divided into 10 toes, and then the kingdom of heaven would take over the whole earth. So because we believe that, we can interpret this dream. And when we look in Daniel chapter 2, we find in verse 38 that it says, "And wheresoever the children of men dwell, the beasts of the field and the fowls of the heaven hath he given unto thine hand, and hath made thee ruler over them all. Thou art this head of gold." So we believe that the birds of heaven and the beasts of the field find their shelter and their food from this tree, because it tells us that in the vision we just read. And that being the case, we know that this is talking about a man. It's talking about Nebuchadnezzar himself. Also in Psalm chapter 1 verse 3, we're told that a tree represents a human being. And in Ezekiel 31:3, it even says that the king of Assyria is like a tree. What else do we know from this? Well, the tree, it says, was cut down. So that means something happened to Nebuchadnezzar. Something happened to his government. And it says, but a stump was left. So that tells us there was still life. If you've ever seen a stump of a tree with a sprout coming out of it, you know there's still life in the stump. And this stump, it says, was surrounded by a band of iron and of brass. So when we go back to chapter 2, we find out what iron represents. In verse 40, it says strong as iron. So that means the strength of his kingdom would remain. And in verse 39 of chapter 2, in Daniel's interpretation of the king's dream, it says, a third kingdom of brass which shall rule over all the earth. So that tells us that brass represents worldwide dominion. So this stump has a band of brass and of iron. The strength and the worldwide dominion would be retained. And for 7 times, it says, for 7 years, the man that the dream was about would be eating grass with the beasts of the field, and the dew of heaven would pass over him. So there was some case of insanity that would come to Nebuchadnezzar. The watcher from heaven decreed that this would happen. And the reason this would happen? Well, Daniel told the king, after giving him the interpretation, he said, break off thy sins by righteousness, and thine iniquities by showing mercy to the poor. It may be a lengthening of thy tranquility. So Daniel saw that the king would lose his tranquility. Well, when the king began, because King Nebuchadnezzar is the one that wrote this story in chapter 4, he says, I, Nebuchadnezzar, was at rest in my house and flourishing in my palace. So everything was going well, and it may be all going well for you, and you may be flourishing. But there's coming a crisis, and that crisis comes as a surprise to many. And it's a crisis that investigates our pride. He was a very proud king. He said, is not this great Babylon which I have built? Showing that he depended on himself and his prowess as the source of all his strength of his realm. But he learned after 7 years of eating grass with the wild animals that the God of heaven was the one that gave him his kingdom, and the God of heaven was the one that could show mercy and could deliver him from his situation. And he says, when he recovered, it says, and at the end of the days, I, Nebuchadnezzar, lifted up mine eyes unto heaven. That means the eye of faith he directed to God. And he confessed his sins, he confessed his pride, and he confessed that God was the one who had rule in the kingdoms of men. And each one of us is going to face a similar crisis, because there's coming a crisis before God's king is put back on the throne. And that crisis is a crisis that determines the pride of our hearts. And our only hope in that crisis is in the mercy of God and in confessing our sins. And our only defense is in prayer. Through prayer, we confess our sins and we give honor to God. And Nebuchadnezzar did this. And so that's how we, too, can interpret dreams if we believe the revelation that has already been given. Amos 3:7 says, God will do nothing but that he revealeth his secret unto his servants, the prophets. Do you believe his prophets? If you do, you have the key for understanding and interpreting dreams.